Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast. We were just talking about how kids across Canada are learning to read. One of the classics of children's literature, of course, is set right here on Prince Edward Island.
What is your name?
Anne Shirley. Anne spelt with an E.
Very few Canadians haven't heard of the red-spirited orphan Anne with an E, Shirley. Just whatever you do, don't call her carrots.
Hey, carrots. Carrots. I do like carrots.
How dare you!
Anne Shirley, what is the meaning of this?
It was my fault, sir. I was teasing her.
Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery has been adapted for the screen more than 24 times. It's sold more than 50 million copies, translated into 20 languages. This year would have been Lucy Maud Montgomery's 150th birthday. And so, as you can imagine, P.E.I. is celebrating. I'm joined now by two enthusiasts. See what I did there? Linda Lowther is with the committee responsible for Anne of Green Gables tourism in Cavendish PEI. Judith Graves is a compiling editor and co-author of Anthology. It is a book of spin-off Anne stories, and they're both here in Charlottetown. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning.
Linda, it's interesting because stories and characters in those stories come and go over time. It is rare that something sticks around for generations. It's rare that those later generations still have an attachment that perhaps the earlier generations might. What do you think it is about Anne of Green Gables that continues to make her so beloved?
Well, I think it's two things. One is her feistiness and good story, feel good, conquers all kind of person. The other thing is that people are getting to know Montgomery more and more all the time. And now that we know more about the author, I think people are starting to make links about what makes her books timeless is some of her life and what she wrote about.
I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Judith, what about for you? You've called yourself an Anne fangirl.
Mm-hmm. Totally, yes.
What do you love about her?
Everything, I would say,
Everything?
about Anne. Everything about Anne is absolutely top-notch. She is feisty, smart. She stands her ground, but she's vulnerable and she's trying to find her place, and everyone can identify with that.
What do you remember about first reading her?
Junior high, braces, glasses, not fitting in. Dad's in the forces, so we're moving all the time. And then there's this miniseries that comes on, and I'm glued to the TV. And we used to live in Summerside when I was a kid, so I was like, oh my gosh, I have to, dive into Ellen Montgomery. So, yeah, that's essentially how it started for me, was the link from television back to book and then writing.
Linda, I think that probably sounds familiar to a lot of people.
I think so. Even with me, I first came to PEI visiting relatives, didn't speak English very much, went back to Montreal, found an English library and said, what's this Anne of Green Gables thing all about? And fell totally in love.
What is this Anne of Green Gables thing all about? Which is a question now that, that this opens up a whole new universe to you.
Totally. It really opens up different themes, different things to talk about nowadays that we might not have talked about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Anne with an E, for example, the CBC production, brought out some new ways of looking at Anne. But it's universal, really.
As you mentioned, one of the reasons you say that people still find an attraction to Anne is because they're learning more about the author. These celebrations, I mentioned the 150th anniversary of Montgomery's birth, are about more than Anne of Green Gables. Tell us a bit more about what we should know about her.
So, for example, one of the things that people don't know about her is she was a fabulous photographer. We have a photo exhibit of some of the photos that she took, but we also asked PEI photographers to take some of her quotes and be inspired by those and go out throughout PEI through the summer and take some photos, and we have an exhibit of those. We have a gentleman who's also doing a photo tour talking about the types of tips that she would give in her journals or to some of her readers about how to take great photos. So that's one of the things that people don't know about her. The other thing that people don't know about her, she was a fashion maven. She loved fashion. She loved anything to do with crafts. She was a great scrapbooker. She loved flowers. And of course, she loved nature more than most people do. She really talked a lot about nature. And when we look at what people come to PEI for, quite often it is about the scenery that we have. So it's a lot more than just her writing.
Is it true she's still the world's best-selling children's author?
Apparently so I'm told.
That's amazing when you think about it. Yeah. Judith, what you have done with this anthology, it's out in this particular anniversary year. If I were to call it a departure from the traditional Anne stories, I think that might be underselling it a little bit. I spent some time this weekend reading some of these stories. Can you just describe the brief? What did you ask the authors who contributed to this to do?
So essentially I said, are you willing to take Anne on a different adventure? And who is Anne to you? And if you could interpret that story in any setting, the character could be any sex, any gender, any race, any creature, and in my case, like a cyborg. Mm-hmm. And most of them were just amazed at the opportunity to take a classic icon like Anne on new adventures. So
were there any limits at all that the authors had?
The character had to be named Anne, had to have red hair or a reference to red hair, had to be an orphan, and the story had to in some way harken back to the original themes of family, finding yourself, belonging, self-identity, self-worth. But
other than that, it was wide open.
Whoa, yes.
I'd read that you specifically had said that you were looking for shock value.
I was, when I wrote my first story, I entered a contest and I took Anne on a spin and it won the contest. And I really wanted to go for full shock value. At first I was thinking something with Anne and mutant potatoes, but then I went with Anne as a cyborg AI unit instead, sleeper assassin ascending on Avonlea.
Why a cyborg of all the things? When you think of Anne of Green Gables, the cyborg is not perhaps the first thing that leaps to mind?
Right. I think because I wanted her to be kind of a warrior and have I really had that scene of her using her parasol to like stab an eye out. I had to be in there.
Had to be there.
Had to be there. And I knew that was shocking. AI is really a scary thing right now. I mean, potentially great and potentially really horrifying. Mm-hmm. And the fusion of humanity and machine, the whole Terminator thing. Why not make Anne a Terminator?
And yet, if I might say, I mean, the cyborg is perhaps not the most shocking incarnation of Anne in this collection. What are some of the other incarnations of Anne in this book?
Yes, and the one that I was gobsmacked with is Susie Maloney's. I knew, she's a horror writer, mm-hmm. great Canadian horror writer. I knew she would take Anne in awesome places, and man, she went for it. So she's the first story. And if you can survive that story, then the rest of them, you'll settle in really well with the other stories. We really went hard with her. Did you read hers?
I did, but I don't want to spoil it too much, but just give people a sense as to what Susie did with this.
Okay, so Anne is known for reading books. Anne reads a book and becomes possessed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then things happen.
Oh, yes.
I mean, Anne is also a vampire. Anne is also a boy.
Mm-hmm. Which is really cool because all of these authors used parts of their life experiences, right? So we have Paul Kacha with Anne, who's a boy. It's a LGBTQ mm-hmm. gay character who has body identity issues and stuff. He's overweight. So you have a young gay kid who's overweight. That's great. That's the equivalent of a redheaded girl in the 1800s or early turn of the century. So there's that. And then there's Matthew Dawkins' story. So he's from the Caribbean. So we have a black Anne who's trafficked. So we go to some really interesting places. And then we have stories that will appeal more to the purist, more of the true Montgomery fans, with Deirdre Kessler's story. Very interesting. She takes Anne, who's a verbose character, and makes her mute. Mm. It's very poetic. Then we have Sherry Green, who is a poet. She writes novels in verse, and so she takes Anne to the Yukon, but it's all in verse. It's just... You'll have to cleanse your palate between each story. Go for a walk,
down to the beach or something like that. Yeah,
yeah. And then come back.
You mentioned the purists. Mm-hmm. There are Anne purists.
Yes.
People have been outraged by the possibility of Anne's story being taken in different directions in past. I mean, people were wound up about, and this word means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but there was concern over woke Anne.
Right.
Have purists been offended by this?
Sure, yeah.
You don't seem to mind.
No, I don't, because our goal was to honor Montgomery's work and perhaps introduce and to a new generation of kids who might otherwise go, yeah, it's a classic. Yeah, do I really want to get into it? And we have these short stories that are really engaging and exciting, and then they can go back to the original with a bit more appreciation.
So your sense is that this would be kind of a gateway to the original stories for a new generation?
The gateway drug for Anne of Green Gables fans, yes.
Linda, I'm not saying that you're a purist, but what do you make of this idea?
Oh, I'm kind of the same way. Anytime that you can have people pick up a book that celebrates Anne in some way, shape, or form, and then that maybe takes them to the original and maybe takes them to other Montgomery books, whether it's Emily or The Blue Castle or whatever, I'm all for it.
What would you say to the purists who might? I can imagine there are people who are listening who grew up reading Anne, and they're like, really? Do we need something like this? What would you say to them?
Well, I'm not sure that we need it, but I think it's there. The people who do it are generally doing it as a celebration. Yeah. So I don't take offense to it at all. And if you're a purist and you want to stick to the real thing, you don't have to go read the other stuff.
How big of a draw is Anne for tourists still today?
Well, there's over a couple of 100,000 people a year that visit Green Gables Heritage Place and the site of Lucy Maud Montgomery's Cavendish home.
And from all over the world.
And they're from all over the world. And it's interesting, too, because since I've been on this committee, I've been at the Visitor Information Center probably 2-3 times a week. And I just stand there and listen to people asking questions. And it just amazes me and thrills me to see that people are asking questions. Where can I see this? Or where can I see that? Or where was she born? And what did she write about? And can I go see some of the places that she talked about, which is why we have the literary tour on P.E.I. now, so people can go and be inspired by the places that inspired her.
What does that tell you?
She's timeless. The writing is timeless. It still reaches people, and I think it'll continue to reach people for a long, long time.
Judith, I'm cautious to ask this, but do you ever wonder whether people on the island get tired of being associated with Anne of Green Gables? I mean, P.E.I. is a glorious, gorgeous place for any number of different reasons.
Yes, it is. I call it Anne fatigue.
Anne fatigue.
Anne fatigue,
okay.
Yes. So my husband is a teacher here in high school, and I asked him out of curiosity when I was thinking of pitching this idea, I said, just ask your kids how many have read Anne of Green Gables. And I think there was maybe one. But it's not because they wouldn't be interested. It's honestly because they're like, dude, I'm not going anywhere near Anne of Green Gables. She's everywhere. So there is that Anne fatigue, especially in the younger generation who, grow up with it everywhere. It's all the touristy stuff. It's the raspberry cordial drinks in the store. Yes, she is prolifically embraced on the island as a tourist attraction, as a mecca. And I see both sides of it because I live here now and I understand that aspect of it. But I also am a fangirl, so I'm like, bring on the Anne.
What do you make of that, Linda? Just finally. I mean, the fatigue, but also it's a huge driver of, tourism, of part of the economy, of how people get attached to the island. This might be the gateway drug for them coming to P.E.I.
Oh, absolutely. It is the gateway drug for a lot of people to get them to come to Prince Edward Island, for sure. And yes, you get people who roll their eyes and so on. And that was kind of one of the subtle reasons why we really focused on Montgomery this year rather than Anne, because people, even Islanders, don't know Montgomery really, really well. They know a lot about the story of Anne. Even if they've never read the book, they know a lot about her. But they don't know a whole lot about Montgomery. So, yes, there is Anne fatigue. There's no doubt about it. But, you go to Orlando and is there Disney fatigue? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is what it is. And she is a very big economic driver for this province. And if we can get more people reading it, that would be wonderful.
That's a great idea. I'm really glad to talk to you both about this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Judith Graves is the compiling editor and co-author of Anthology. Linda Lowther is on the committee responsible for Anne of Green Gables tourism in Cavendish.